Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today I have a native Texan by the name of Bob Malinak, an amazing man, and that's the way I'm going to describe him throughout this show. Now, he graduated from Temple High School in 1954. He received a BA degree from Rice Institute in 1958 and an L.L.B degree from the University of Texas School of Law in 1961. Now, he was a trial lawyer in the Baker Botts Law Firm in Houston until 1999. After that, until 1965, he was an arbitrator and a mediator. Now, there's a lot of other things that we could talk about and tell you about him, but I'm going to have him give you some more information. So I want to welcome Bob Malinak to the Susan Brender Show. Welcome, Bob.
Good afternoon. Good welcome to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Now, people, when they listen to your accent, they know you must be a Texan, correct?
That is correct. Central Texas.
Okay, now, when you're a Texan, is there anything very interesting or different from being, say, an Easterner from New York? I mean, there must be something that separates the two of you. So, and if there is so, what is that?
Well, other than our accent, as far as I know, we obviously we have much more land in Texas than we have than there is in New York, and we travel a little more within the state than we do throughout the varying states on the East Coast because they're so much smaller and we're so much larger and have more places to go here.
Yeah, you know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say I have during my law practice I spent a number of years at varying times up in that part of the country, and the people here, to be perfectly frank, seem to be a little more open. And I'm not going to use the word honest because that's inappropriate, but seem to be a little more open and accepting than the people up there that I ran into.
Okay, now you graduated high school in 1954, and then you went on for a different degree in 1958 and in 61 and all those years, and it's a long time ago. Now, Bob, what was happening around the country at that time? I'd like people to know from somebody who was there how important and how interesting our country was from the way it is today. How would you describe that?
All right. In 1954, when I graduated from high school, the Vietnam War had just ended, and a lot of the Vietnam vets had returned and were accepted openly in, at least in my part of the country, in Central Texas. Life was good. Life was good in Central Texas. It was simple. Television sets were, at that point in history, it was unusual to have a television set. They were a luxury to have in the house.
Right. Yeah.
We got our news by radio and newspaper.
Yeah. Now you said Vietnam War ended. Was that the first part
I said Vietnam. I meant Korean War. I apologize.
No,
the Korean War. The Korean War ended, I believe, in 1953.
Correct. And so you think that the difference between the way life was then and the way life now is it was just much more simple.
It was more simple. It was slower. It was far less complicated. And there was far less, from my perspective at least, division in the country about which direction the country ought to head.
Yeah.
We were the Cold War was on. The focus was on Russia and the nuclear bombs, and that seemed to me at that point in time to be what people were most concerned about, not what was happening in some other part of the country, but what was happening in Russia and what their motives might be with nuclear warheads.
Now, you know that there is a lot of problems going on between Trump and Putin. So I'm just curious. I would love to know what you think about Mr. Trump and this issue with Russia, because needless to say, you were involved in the Cold War, but I'm really interested in knowing, do you think there might be a war again? Is he provoking Putin?
Oh, I don't think so. I'll say that I am no fan of Donald Trump. I didn't vote for him, and frankly, I didn't vote for the Democrat candidate either. I just stayed away from that particular vote. I think Trump is a bumbler, and I think he's bad for the country, but I don't think he's going to provoke a war with Putin. I think he's got too many intelligent people surrounding him now that will rein him in on that.
Yeah. So let's talk now about your being a trial lawyer. It seems like every show that you see on television today is about the FBI, the CIA, and various other different groups like, the police. And so when you were a trial, first of all, why did you choose to be a trial lawyer? Because, you could have done almost anything in the law, but you chose to be a trial lawyer. So why?
That's a good question, and there's a simple answer. When I went to law school, I had no idea that I wanted to be a lawyer. I was just, frankly, at a loss as to really what I wanted to do with my life. But I knew that if I got a law degree, that it would be advantageous to me in other areas of business. So I went to law school, and as fate had it, my very first class was in the torts class conducted by Dean Page Keaton, who was probably the most outstanding torts professor in the United States of America. Torts, as you know, involves personal injury issues. I was beguiled by Dean Keaton, and when I walked out of his class, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, and I knew I wanted to be a trial lawyer.
Okay.
And that's how that happened.
All right, so you became a trial lawyer. Now, give us some stories about situations that you were involved in and people that you defended or you prosecuted. You weren't a prosecutor, were you?
No. My law practice was strictly civil, and it was I had a minute number of white-collar crimes issues, but for the most part, 99% of it was all civil litigation. Most of it was on the defense side.
Okay, so what does that involve? Because there are so many, now today there are many women who are becoming lawyers. Would you recommend that is a profession? The competition is weird and bad. So would you recommend that young people become lawyers?
The law profession, as I knew it, is far different from the way it is now. It's much more of a business. There's less collegiality among the lawyers than there was back in what I call the golden days in which I practiced. But would I recommend it? For some people, yes. But it's very hard to make your way in the law profession now, starting from the bottom, unless you are an outstanding law student and get in a good law firm and succeed from there. And succeeding from there is difficult.
Mm-hmm. So I asked you the question, Bob, to tell us some stories that you have that you think that our audience would enjoy listening to. So tell us at least one or two stories, if you will.
Oh, I have a number of stories I can tell you. Let me try to pick out one that might be interesting. in one case, I was defending an accounting firm, and two of its accountants, one a senior person and one an intermediate person, and they had been sued by a company who the accounting firm had audited over a period of 7 years. And over that same period of years, the controller of that company was the best friend of one of the auditors that I defended. So we've got the best friend of the auditee, if you will, being audited by his best friend while the auditee was embezzling money.
Oh, whoa.
And to add to the intrigue, if you will, the auditor's wife was having an affair with the auditee.
Oh.
His
You
best
these
friend.
are things, Bob, that you see on television and in the movies. Well, continue, because it sounds fascinating.
Well, as it turned out, the latter evidence was never because we were able to keep that away. Nobody knew that the auditee was engaged in an affair with the auditor's wife. That didn't come to light. But it did come to light that about the friendship and the associations. That trial started out, and we selected a jury, and for maybe 3 or 4 days we tried the case. It was tried in the federal court. The judge in that court was the chief judge of the Southern Division of Texas, and he was in charge of overlooking the Harris County jail system, which at that point in time was not in good shape. From the standpoint that the people held there were being treated badly. Yeah. He got a telephone call that involved that issue, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to defer the case for a few days, and we'll get back with you. Well, in 3 or 4 days, he declared a mistrial. And before the case was scheduled to go to trial again, it was disposed of by settlement. We compromised it and got rid of it.
You hear stories like this, and you say, how did they get away with things of this nature? How did they get away with it? It's a travesty, isn't it?
Well, some life's not fair.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, the judge, in my opinion, was very high-handed, and he didn't treat the parties nicely, if you will.
Yeah.
That was just one judge. There you find different judges who just like the rest of humanity. You have some that are kind and compassionate. You have some that are rough and on the mean side.
Yeah.
So do you? But that's just one story.
Yeah. Oh, well, if that one story is as intriguing as you made it out to be, I could just imagine some of the others. But,
well, I can give you one more that was very interesting. That involved. It was an antitrust case brought in Amarillo, Texas, which is way up in North Texas, Northwest Texas, in the Texas Panhandle near Oklahoma. It was an antitrust case brought in the federal court by some local farmers from Dimmitt, Texas, against all of the members of the corn wet milling industry. Now that is the industry that takes corn, kernels of corn, runs it through what is, in simple terms, is a refinery, and converts it to corn starch and corn syrup. So we had these farmers, a trade association of Dimmitt, Texas, which is not far from Amarillo, who had an abundance of corn. Corn prices were low. There was an oversupply of corn on the market, and they were approached by a couple of people who had been in the corn wet milling industry, who persuaded them that if they built a plant, a corn wet milling plant, like the refinery, right up there, right in their cornfield, essentially, they would make a killing, because corn syrup and cornstarch were not hot commodities, but they were commodities in need by a variety of different people that, for example, people that make corrugated boxes use cornstarch.
Oh.
All your candies use corn syrup.
Right.
Things like that. Well, they did. They borrowed $3 million or so from the local bank, and they proceeded to build this plant. And by the time they got it open, two giant companies, Cargill Inc., which was the largest family-owned company in the country, and ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, decided to go in the corn wet milling industry up in the Midwest, where really they sell their most product. So by the time these farmers got online with their plant, you had these giants that were coming online, and all of a sudden there was a tremendous oversupply of cornstarch and corn syrup. And the farmers claimed that there was a conspiracy among all the corn wet millers in the country. At that time, there must have been 9, maybe 12, to run them out of business by lowering the prices. And the obvious defense was the prices went lower because there was an oversupply of the product at that point in time.
Yeah, it's called supply and demand, but
exactly,
right.
Exactly. But that case drug on for we tried it in 5 years, but in the over the course in time, we learned through getting into the bank records by that time their loans had to be transferred among different banks, and they had all kind of documentation about what was happening. And we were able to discover that one of these two people who talked them into building the plant was stealing the money from them.
Oh, whoa. And what about the discovery evidence? Where did that go?
Well, we got that through discovery.
Oh.
We got through that through discovery, and then got into all their documentation. And as time went by, there were I want to say I'm going to say 10, but may have been one less companies involved in the litigation. As time went by, each of them would drop out with a settlement, and the way these farmers' lawyers were funding their case was by making relatively small settlements with these other defendants and using the money to finance to go after my client, who happened to be the largest in the industry.
Oh, boy.
So over the course of 5 years, and fairly late in the game, when maybe there were 3 or 4 companies left, and I have to add that this individual, the thief, was also a plaintiff in the case. He was suing in his own name.
What a complicated case, and who really suffers in these situations? Is it the employees because they lose their jobs? Different things happen as a result of all this. What we used to say, stealing, and you name it. And the banks. What about the banks? $3 million they gave away, and what happened to that money? Well,
what happened to that money is that they lost their money, and a large part of it went into the pocket of this thief. But what a very interesting twist is that there must have been 4 or 5 defendants left in the case at the time this happened, he put in a conference call to all of the lawyers for the defendants who were left in the case, or his lawyer did, and said, I'll give his name. His name was Harsh. He said, Mr. Harsh will talk to you gentlemen and give you a lot of information that you'd like to have.
Right.
So we said, fine. We met in Dallas, and we walk in the room, and Mr. Harsh and his lawyer walks in the room and make sure we're not all bugged, wearing wires. And he proceeds to tell us, now first, he said, I've got all the smoking guns that will get you guys out of this case and your clients out of this case for nothing.
Wow. This would make,
he said,
I'll let you finish in a second. When I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of a series that you could put on Netflix. These are the kinds of stories that people love to listen to. But go ahead. Go on.
Well, there was what I'll call a hook, an upfront payment of $1 million to him. Well, nobody said a word. We folded up our papers and left. We tried the case in Amarillo, and when we tried it, there was only one left, my client, and we tried it for 2 months. And there was we thought we'd won the case. The jury verdict is too complicated to go into here, but the jury verdict was such that we thought we'd won the case outright. The judge thought otherwise. The judge entered a judgment in an antitrust case. The damages are tripled. And I'm remembering now the bank loan was $2.5 million, and the jury awarded them that. So it was a $7,500,000 verdict. Judgment plus attorney's fees. We appealed, and we won on appeal.
You did. You won.
We won, but the Court of Appeals remanded it back to the trial court for another trial, in which was a highly unusual event. In our opinion, we should have walked away, but nevertheless, as the second trial approached, as was in the other case I told you about, we settled it.
You settled it,
and the parties walked
wow.
away. So the farmers got some of their money back.
Yeah. But they're the ones who suffer the most, don't they?
They did.
Go ahead.
They did suffer the most, and the sad thing about it is these were salt of the earth people.
It's
all individual farmers joined together. I'll repeat, the kind of people that you'd want to have dinner with every night.
Sure. Now, it's a very interesting thing that today a lot of the farmers, especially the ones who grow corn and various other staples like that, they're selling off their farms to the big industries. And people it's kind of sad if you think about it, because what was more wonderful than to have little farmers grow all kinds of veggies and sell them, and they do business with you like it was your friend doing business with you. Today, everything is made by these big corporations. What do you think?
Yes,
of that?
you can in the summertime you can get in your car and drive around some parts of Texas and find these little vegetable stands on the side of the road where you can. That still happens, but you're right. It's not something. It's not something that's an everyday occurrence, and it is sad. My family is a farming family.
So you understand, and you realize what's going on. Well, let's change course now, because I want to talk a little bit about your baseball. So Bob became a serious baseball fan when he listened to the radio broadcast of the World Series game between New York Yankees and the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. He was a 3-time letter winner when he played third base for the Temple High School baseball team. And now you wrote a book all about that. So why did you write the Ricky Braddock Series? And tell our audience what that's all about.
Well, I'll start back from a little bit different angle than the baseball. One of my favorite authors is John Grisham, who is a lawyer and who, as you know, writes a lot of stories, very good stories, and many of them are about lawyers, law firms, and judges.
Right.
In many of John Grisham's books, if not most of the lawyers and the judges and people in the story, which make for very interesting reading, are scoundrels.
Oh.
Well, I decided that I wanted to write a book about lawyers who were up-and-up lawyers.
You mean
not
real
scoundrels,
lawyers?
not sleazy,
Not
but
sleazy.
ethical professionals.
Right.
And I decided then that, well, that's going to be hard to do just if it's just about lawyers, and I don't have the intellect that John Grisham has for writing the intrigue along the way that he does. But I decided that I'd write about a baseball players too, and connect the two. So I've got a family of lawyers in a small town. It's not small; it's a college town named Huntsville, 60 miles east of Houston, whose son decides that he wants to become a baseball player when he comes to Houston and watches Nolan Ryan pitch a no-hitter in the Astrodome when he's 8 years old. And he sets his mind on doing just that, and he was well on his way to doing it. His father and mother, who were both exceptional lawyers, insisted that he would get a college education before he turned professional. He agreed to that. So he came to Rice. It's now Rice University, my school, and incidentally, I played baseball for a couple of years at Rice as well. And he became a 3-time All-American pitcher at Rice.
Right.
Became the highest paid rookie ever.
Just curious. What did he make? What sum did he make? Because today, our sports people and our entertainers are making millions upon millions of dollars.
I think I had him making like an $11 million bonus.
Not bad,
Plus an exceptional annual income locked in for 5 years.
Mm.
He had a wonderful rookie year, and he was on his way in his second year to becoming. He was just a superstar.
Yeah.
And he had this tragic event where baseball hit him in the eye. He lost his eye. He lost his life.
Wow.
And he became a lawyer.
Oh.
And joined the law firm with his parents.
Right.
He became a trial lawyer. He became a trial lawyer because I know about trials and how trial lawyers behave. And it goes on from there.
That's fantastic. Now, why did you select Texas as the backdrop for your story? There must be a reason for that.
Well, I was born in Temple, and all my life I've lived in Temple. I came back to school here to Houston at Rice for 3 years. I went back to the University of Texas in Austin for 3 years. Now that area encompasses, if you made a triangle there, you drive 60 miles from Temple to Austin, and 160 miles east to Houston from both places.
Right.
So I've grown up, my whole life I've lived right here in this part of the country. So I know this part of the country, and of course, as I said, I went to school here, and it seemed natural to me to write about places, events that happened in places that I knew a lot about.
Sure. So you wrote 2 books at that time, and I'll just say the names, and Roadblocks and When the Road Ends as the names of your books. Now,
correct.
Did your personal experiences play a vital role in writing your stories? Because, these stories are just, they're alive. They're very vital. They're very today, in fact. They'll last forever. Now, did any of your personal stories, as I said before, play a vital role?
Absolutely, and some of the way I've set up the legal aspect of it is that most of the lawyer events, if you will, are courtroom scenes. So that I have a lot of transcripts of Q&A and dialogue with the judge back and forth. They're courtroom scenes, and I think, with maybe one exception, every one of the cases involves a case of the kind that I was involved in during the course of my career.
So you drew it all upon your experiences, and that's what makes it seem so real, the fact that it was part of your life in a way, correct?
Absolutely, and of course they're not all taken up with what happened in the courtroom, but there are scenes obviously about how the lawyers deal with their clients to prepare for trial, to prepare them for what the eventualities might be if the case is tried, and in almost every one of them, I have a turn of events that is unusual and that makes it different from what you see on television. Right. We have hung juries, we have mistrials for a variety of different reasons, but all of which are very real kind of happenings.
Yeah. Now, who would be really attracted to these books? Or is there a certain age? Or is it for specific lawyers, for sports people? Who would love to read your books?
Well, I would hope that anyone would enjoy reading when I say anyone, anybody who's out of college at least, who had any feelings at all about or questions about what might happen in a baseball game, what might happen in a lawsuit, would be interested in, and I have some love interest in it too. It's just not about a bunch of men going out and playing baseball and a bunch of lawyers in the courtroom. There are some some love affairs involved.
Oh, and, so you're very smart. You put a little sex in it, and sex sells.
Well, I don't have any overt sex in it. Let's put it that way.
Well, maybe in the next book, Bob. You never know. I mean, you have to try to attract people, and unfortunately, one of the things that attracts them, and I don't say unfortunate, I shouldn't say that word, is, as I said, sex sells, and it's very interesting. Now, Bob, last but not least, do you have any plans to write another book? What else do you want to do in your life? You've led a long life, a beautiful life, an exciting life. You're a very smart man. So anything else that you want to plan or do with your life?
Well, I have to tell you that I have written a third book, one that was self-published, and sold probably 10 or 11 years ago. And it was the story of a basketball player. I'm a sports nut. I'm not just baseball. I'm a sports nut, and I played all the sports as a youngster. And this book is about a basketball player. It was called The Girl of the Game, a young man who was a superstar basketball player who dedicated his life to being an NBA All-Star and then ultimately a Hall of Fame coach. He has a similar event to what Ricky Braddock had in this case, where he lost his ability to play the game, but he fell in love with this girl early on in his college career, and after a number of years they got back together, and they both wanted to get married, but she was hell-bent on being a doctor and to stay in her practice was going to stay in Houston. And he was going to be a basketball coach. He couldn't play anymore, but he had his eye on a really good coaching job, which would obviously take him far and away from Houston. So he had to make a choice. Had to make a choice, the girl or the game.
There you go. Well, don't give
and
that.
I am thinking about. I have written maybe 4 chapters of a sequel to that book. Now, how long it might take me to finish, if I finish it or not. I'm 80 years old. And,
Bob, you're an inspiration. For people who really love listening to somebody who's had a very wonderful life. What an inspiration you are. I mean, as you said, you're 80 years old, and you're still writing, and you're telling stories, and you're on shows like mine, and I think that your books are going to be very successful. So my guest today has been Bob Malinak, who was a lawyer and a very special one, but he's also a writer, and he's written the Ricky Braddock Series, and he's still writing other books. So if you have a chance, Bob, where can people get your book?
They can email me at my address is Bob Malinak, BOBMALINAK, @yahoo.com.
Okay. Well, I suggest to everybody, if you want to have a chance to read something very interesting, read Bob Malinak's books. And so I want to say to Bob, thank you so much for being on the Susan Brender Show. It was really a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Susan, and I certainly have enjoyed visiting with you.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.